Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to Slang of Ages Podcast Season 9. Today is a special treat for me. I'm talking with Mark Wade about his wonderful new album. The Mark Wade Trio has new stages coming out on March 27th, 2026. Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great. Good to be here.
It's good to have you here. I have enjoyed new stages, and I know I reviewed a bunch of your albums. I think let's see, True Stories back in 2022,
Hmm.
which was wonderful. I think the first album I reviewed of yours was Moving Day, which was 2018,
Yeah, that's
which
it.
made my best of list for the year. Both terrific albums. And then Songs in Isolation came out during the pandemic in 2020, I believe.
Hmm.
All wonderful albums, and I think your first album I did not review, but that was wonderful as well. So hear New Stages is a special treat for me. And one of the things I appreciate about you as an arranger, a band leader, a composer is that you really have a knack for making wonderful jazz music accessible. And this album, New Stages, seems to well let me let's start the question, the obvious question. How did you come up with the concept around new stages?
Besides playing jazz, and people know me from my jazz trio and then the records that you mentioned, which I appreciate, the I also play classical music, and I have for a number of years. And So I've always had that music rolling around in my brain as well. I've always appreciated all the incredible, melodies and sounds that come out of the orchestra as well as from a jazz concert. And at a certain point, I'd heard some music, and I thought, I'm not sure how I'm going to use this. I have to use it. I have to find some way to use it. To me, it means so much. I got to find a way. So I wrote an arrangement all the way back after, it was right after we had finished the first album back in 2015. I think that
Wow.
album came out, and I think I'd just recently been out of the studio or something, and uh, I came across solo piano work by Frederick Chopin. Chopin is was always one of my favorite composers. So I um, I I wrote this piece from that, and it didn't quite fit with my other music. And I thought, well, it's neat. I'm not sure what to do with it. And then over the years, I would come back to this idea of, well, maybe I could write some other things like that. And the project kind of snowballed from there. It was really over a period of 8 years that I wrote the music for this album. Now, I put out two other albums in the meantime. I put out Moving Day, I put out True Stories, and also the one over the pandemic. So I guess three. But it was always in the back of my mind to take music from the orchestra or the classical rep and try to create something that sounded like it belonged in a set of my own original jazz music. And that's really where the idea for the album came from.
So you were working with Tim Harrison on the piano and Scott Newman, your other members of your trio on drums. When you did when you thought about this original concept, did you record with them at that time, or did this recording come start recently?
Recently. So, I mean, the writing started all that time ago, but I waited until I kind of had everything together and then went into the studio for one fell swoop. It's, I personally find it a little difficult to record a project over a long period of time because the band changes over a period of time. Your ideas might change. And I really try my best with whatever record I'm putting out to try to create a project, something that sounds like it belongs in a set of music by itself. And sometimes if you kind of spread it out like that, it's easy to kind of drift maybe away from a complete set of music. I realize that in the days of streaming where you can download this track or that track and not listen to the album as a whole as you used to years ago, that concept might get broken a little bit, but I still think that way.
I think New Stages works perfectly though as an album. I can't imagine picking out one track. It works perfectly as an album, and it works perfectly, even though they're different composers. It works perfectly hearing these compositions together by your trio.
Mhm.
Um, where did you record the album?
So we recorded the album, same place we had recorded the last album, and that is a wonderful studio just outside of the New York City limits called Octaven Recording in New Rochelle, New York, just right over the Bronx County line. A lot of people have been recording there. We had done our first two records at a place called Systems 2 in Brooklyn, another place that a lot of jazz musicians would use. When that closed, a lot of people were looking for another place that had an excellent piano sound. And when you have a piano trio, the piano sound's kind of important. So, it's a wonderful studio. Shout out to Octaven and Ryan Strebig there. They've just created an amazing operation there. And they just make everything sound great.
It does sound wonderful. It's extremely warm. Your bass is fantastic, and the piano, like you mentioned, the cymbals and the snare comes across really well. Now, you've mentioned that you worked in orchestra pits before, and you spend a lot of time working in classical music and orchestras, and you teach as well, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, my teaching wise, I'm on the jazz faculty at Lehigh University in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is just about an hour 45 minutes away from me here in New York City. It sounds like it's far, but it's pretty doable. Everybody on the faculty there, including Scott Newman, my drummer, and Tim Harrison, who's recently left the faculty, he was on faculty there as well. It's all New York guys. Everybody drives out, and you kind of do your teaching on one day and come back. But yeah, in addition to that, playing, in the orchestra music as a freelancer here in New York City, played quite a bit. I'll give a shout out to the Bronx Opera Company, who I've been working for in some capacity for probably about 18 or 19 years. People don't realize we have an opera company in the Bronx, but they've actually been there 56 years.
Wow.
That's a long time to run an arts organization, especially an opera company. We do fully staged, performances, with a full orchestra and all that. And people think of New York, all the music that's happening in New York, but there really aren't any more opera companies left that are that kind of mid-tier group. So everybody knows the Metropolitan Opera, rightfully so. They're amazing. But a lot of those kind of mid-tier companies have fallen by the wayside. And so Bronx, we're kind of the last ones left, where it's either like you're performing, in a basement somewheres, or at the Metropolitan Opera. We're kind of that middle ground.
Yeah, it's unusual for a mid-tier opera company to have a full orchestra. I mean, that's fantastic. And I'm in Atlanta now, and they have an opera company here, which is pretty good. But I came from Chicago, so I was used to going to see opera at the Lyric in Chicago, and
Yeah.
oh, amazing stuff. But let's get back to new stages, because this is so fascinating in terms of how the music comes across. And I want to talk about some of the tracks, if I may.
Sure.
You start the album off with Children's Corner Suite, which is a Debussy interpretation. Wow. Tell us about that.
So in general with the album, I think one of the things that was challenging for the album, and that I really challenged myself as an arranger, was to take all these different sources. So in the case of this first track, the Children's Corner Suite, it's a solo piano work that I'm expanding out for a trio. And then there's other tracks, which we may get to on the album, that are big, large orchestral works and concertos, like, pieces for 80, 90 musicians and a soloist, and then distilling that down to 3 people for a trio. So, that in general with this project, that's always the challenge. It's listening to the work. What are the essential things about this that I really like, that really speak to me? What do I think is the important stuff that I want to draw from this? And then how do I translate this into what we do, what the Mark Wade Trio does, what our music does? So in the case of the Children's Corner Suite, the Debussy Suite, it was 6 movements of solo piano that Debussy originally wrote. Of those 6, I took 4 and created, like our suite, which is 4 movements. The last one being the most famous one, Cakewalk, would be, if you were a classical music fan, if you listen to classical music, or even if you're maybe more casual, that would be the one you might recognize the best.
I'm glad you said that, because I didn't recognize the other pieces, and I thought I remember hearing Cakewalk before, but
Yeah.
um, I think if you're not a classic music fan, if you don't know these pieces, great, because you'll still love them.
Yeah.
And if you know or have a hint of some of these, I'm looking at the list, I'm thinking, wow, some of these I just don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm not really a big classical music fan, but I've seen a lot of classical music. Um, so it's just great to have these versions of that. So, yeah, Children's Corner Suite, you talked about The Good Doctor. Well, the first part of that is The Good Doctor, which
Hmm.
is has a wonderful drum break and solo and great sound to it. You mentioned that the Children Corner Suite is, you said, was it six movements originally
Originally
or eight?
six. Yeah,
Okay.
six. I think originally six, if memory serves correct.
Mhm. Why'd you pick these four?
Well, good question. So, I love the work, but with all of this stuff, whether it's this piece or any other piece, like I think you have to. I felt that you have to be very careful with a project like this that it doesn't turn into like just Beethoven with a beat behind it. That it's if anybody remembers a fifth of Beethoven from the disco era, like we want it could get cheesy in a hurry if you just take the original and just put a drum beat behind it. It really is very difficult, I found, and it was a really fun challenge to have to really think about the essence of the tune and how I could use this to translate. And frankly, some of these movements work better than others, and that's why I picked the ones that I did. The last one, Cakewalk, is a combination of Debussy's music and a bridge by Thelonious Monk. And I wrote it so that the concept of taking that sound, Cakewalk, to me, it had such a quirky vibe, and it reminded me a little bit of the music of Thelonious Monk. So I thought, oh, let me try to, let's go that way. Like, so the harmony and the work on the bridge and the extra melody that I wrote, it comes right out of Thelonious Monk. And so you put it all together, and hopefully you get something new, something that, like, hey, I hadn't heard it that way before. So that's in general, the selection process for the music was about trying to come up with something that is that music, inspired by that music, but at the same time is something new. And to straddle that divide over 72 minutes for the length of the album, is a challenge. It was a challenge.
That's wonderful. I mean, Cakewalk is so what's the, like so rhythmic.
Mm.
It is so accessible. Has such a great feel to it. Absolutely love it. Yeah, and wow, that's great, Mark. So let's go to the next song, which the next song, because we have actually
Yeah.
we talked about the suite,
Yeah.
which would be Saga.
Saga. Yeah. So here's a good example of the complete opposite direction. So we have a solo work for the Debussy. Here we have the a work that was inspired by the first two movements of the Sibelius violin concerto. So Jan Sibelius, famous Finnish classical composer, the Sibelius violin concerto would be kind of a cornerstone of like the solo concerto violin repertoire. So if you're a classical violinist, the Sibelius violin concerto, and you've spent many an hour struggling away at the cadenzas. Um, One of my favorite pieces. I think the first time I heard it, it was one of those pieces in the orchestra. I didn't grow up listening to classical music, so a lot of times my first exposure to this music was actually performing it, was playing it, somewheres.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, so like it was it. I did not start out. I didn't study classical music as a kid. I didn't come up in that tradition. So I would have these moments where I'd be playing these wonderful masterworks, and like some part of it hits you, and it's just so moving. Again, the inspiration for this album, just to do something with that somehow. And this was one of those pieces. Just some fantastic melodies. Sibelius's music in general has always been something that I gravitated towards. Just is very, at times, very dark, kind of emotional moments. And then when he's happy, he's the happiest dude on the planet. It's like the sun comes out. It's really, really good. So here I'm not only am I synthesizing like an 80 piece orchestra down to a piano trio, but also taking into consideration a solo violinist who's playing this stuff as well. But luckily, Sibelius' music is such a rich landscape of gorgeous melodies and sounds and harmonies and ideas. And it's really one of my favorite tracks on the record. Trying to create that orchestral sound with three people, but it's still jazz. I mean, I don't want to mislead our listeners. Like, this is still a jazz record, but that crosses over with this kind of classical vibes as well.
Oh, it absolutely is jazz. I love the slow burning kind of intro to it, and then
Mm.
the solos that you take, as well as the piano solo, the piano solo at the end. Which, wow,
Yeah.
it's I don't know if it might be my favorite on the album. We're
Mm.
close. I absolutely love it. It's
Yeah.
good stuff. All right, so we're going to jump to some Chopin, the
Mm.
Storm.
Oh yeah. So I Chopin was like my entry level, or my entry into classical music actually. It was, I had a roommate in college who knew this stuff very well. He was a classical music fan anyways. He didn't play it, but and he was the one that introduced me to Chopin. That was how I got interested in classical music. So of course that music is near and dear to my heart. This particular piece was one of the Chopin preludes, number 24, but not maybe one of the most famous ones. In
Okay.
general, with this record, I actually try to not pick the most obvious tracks. And so when you said, "Hey, I looked at this and I didn't," there's things on here I didn't know. In a way, that was intentional. I didn't. A lot of people have done similar things or have broached this subject before, of this jazz classical kind of marriage. And so I didn't want to take such obvious things. I wanted to find things that A, I liked, but B, was not maybe the first choice. And so here's a piece in Chopin's prelude, I think number 24 in D minor,
24.
which he
Mhm.
also calls the Storm. I'd use the same title. So one of the hallmarks of Chopin's music for me has always been, of the Romantic period in general, is that kind of push and pull of the music, that it isn't strictly in time, that rubato emotional feeling. And you think, well, how do I recreate that in jazz, right? Where a lot of times we're playing in time, we're playing a groove, we're playing a beat. And I thought, well, let's just get rid of the groove altogether. Let's play free for the majority of the track. And so that's what you hear on this particular track, that we're really playing a lot looser, free, without any time. And it helps kind of create that big picture feeling of the push and pull of the music, of the freedom for it to kind of go wherever it likes. But in still kind of more of a freer jazz context than classical context.
So, in terms of your arrangement with the band, do you bring in a sketch work written out for them, and then you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a good question. I write all the music for the band, and of course in jazz, when we say we write all the music, it still means that there's always going to be moments of improvisation. So I don't script out every note the piano is going to play or the drums are going to play. Jazz in general is a framework, although there are times when it might be what we would say through composed, literally written out pretty much note for note, like maybe just for this section or for that thing. And other times I might have even fewer instructions, that it's like, it's a concept and let's see what the three of us bring to this in the moment, and it happens. And so that's in general what's happening here. This is a structure and a framework, but it's both more written out than you think and less written out than you think, is the easiest way maybe to explain this in a without getting all technical. But it's very intentional on my part. A lot, like, I'm really thinking out vibe, feel, kind of like the big shapes of things. Are we big here? Are we small here? Are we going to get energetic here? And then sometimes, of course, being that it's jazz, we want to have the freedom to play what it happens in the moment, that spontaneity, that we say, let's just see what happens here. Let's I do want this and I want that, but when we get here, let's just see. And that's, if you can blend those things right, I feel like that's when you can get those nice moments to happen.
So, how many takes are you talking about in terms of the song?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when it comes to people who are used to like playing pop music, um, they layer things in tracks. Like they might record the drum track by itself, then they record the bass track by itself, and then they put the, and so they layer it up. That would be a typical way of doing that, say with maybe more popular music styles. With jazz, you're essentially just capturing a performance in the room. That is ultimately what you're trying to do. So we're all playing live together. in little isolation booths so that the mics don't bleed, but it's essentially a live performance that you're capturing. And with that, you know, you can only be, it's hard to be automatically spontaneous, I guess is what you want to say. So you can play this once, twice, maybe three times. And after that, usually there's a point of diminishing return. So if you don't have something within the first few takes, you probably don't have anything. So for that means that you have to come in with really good players who can improvise and be comfortable in the moment. Kind of once the light goes on, the red light goes on. We don't use a red light anymore, but the proverb used to be the light would come on. That meant you were recording. So once you hit record, boom, you got to go. And it also helps to be well rehearsed when you go into the studio. In our case, we had performed this music, many times. Some of these things we had been playing on and off for years.
Oh, wow.
Like not all of them. Some of them were newer, but some of them like had been in and out of our concert repertoire for years. So, it was music that we were familiar with and we're familiar with each other. So hopefully you come in, you do what you do, you get a couple shots at it. And that's usually after that, when you get into takes 4, 5, and 6, usually, you're going to go end up using stuff from takes 1, 2, and 3 anyway. So.
So, Mark, how long have you been playing with Tim and Scott? How long
Wow.
you had this version of the trio?
Yeah, so we've been at it now for a little while. Our first concert was 2013, I believe. That we played a concert at Flushing Town Hall here in New York, out in Flushing, Queens, and that was the time when I said, you know what? I think I'm ready. I think these are the guys. Let's. I'm going to work towards making that first album, and then that eventually became the 2015 release that we put out. And I've been very fortunate to keep this band working and together since then. And that's a long time. Hard to keep a band working. What I think we do the best, there's a big difference between like a session you put together, you get some great guys to come in and play your music in a recording studio, which is great. There's a big difference between that and a band that's been working and knows each other. And you really do become greater than the sum of its parts. I mean, experiencing it firsthand with my group, I think we all sound better collectively because of that, because we know each other, and you just start to get a sense of when he does that, I'm going to do this, or it's okay if this happens, or it's okay if that happens. And I do think that is kind of like the cornerstone of the sound and of these albums.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a familiarity. There is an empathy that you all have together, which shows through in the recording.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump to Iberia, if you can talk about that.
Sure. So the Iberia, the parts 1 and 2. So
Yes.
this one is a combination of the Rodrigo Guitar Concerto, very famous piece of classical music. Again, if you don't know it, the second movement you hear quite a bit in a lot of places. Some music that I wrote, some music written, let's see, that was Rimsky-Korsakov, a little bit of a Russian composer, and then a little bit of Chick Corea's La Fiesta. So 2 Americans, a Spaniard, and a Russian walk into a bar and write an arrangement of Spanish music. Really, it's when you look at it, there's quite a few composers who have made their mark, writing Spanish music who are not Spanish. We think of Georges Bizet, Carmen, the opera Carmen that people know. He was French. A lot of French composers wrote Spanish music. Obviously, the geography there, there's a little more crossover, back in the day. Then, now music is so global, but back then, it was a little more regional, but the French and the Spanish would have had a little bit more back and forth. So in that tradition, I put together this thing. I have always been a huge fan, and one of the most impactful things that on me was Miles Davis's Sketches of Spain record. And of course, that first movement, the very first piece on that record is the Rodrigo Guitar Concerto that was arranged for Miles by Gil Evans, and it's just so beautiful and so gorgeous. And I've been very fortunate to play the actual concerto in the orchestra, as Rodrigo had intended. And I've always just loved it, and I always just thought I have to find a way to get to play that melody myself one day. I want to get to do it, and so this was a chance. So I actually arranged. Took some of the guitar parts, the solo guitar parts for this, and I'm the guitarist. And in the first part of this, I get to play some of those parts. The big cadenza and some of the stuff at the end are retrofitted and transposed into a slightly friendlier key for the double bass to play. And again, another example of something that I've gravitated to for years, and I finally get a chance to turn that into something that we play. So it was very satisfying for me.
Yeah, it's delightful. It really is. All right, then I'm gonna jump. Well, I guess the next song is Requiem, the three
Mm.
movements.
Yeah. So here's I love this one. Here's a piece that, again, that you might not know. Maurice Duruflé, a French composer, around the turn of the century-ish. Was it early 20th century or late 19th century? Forgive me if I don't have my dates straight, but in that time, French music, so it's this very pretty, kind of light, kind of side to it. I've played this Requiem a number of times. Like, if I might do a freelance gig around town, it would be one of those things that a chorus might do that is not like the chorus from the Metropolitan Opera. I think it's a little bit more accessible, technically, for the chorus, but it's a wonderful piece of music, and there's so many great moments. And so this first, I can't remember how many movements the Requiem Mass, Duruflé's Requiem Mass has, but it's quite a few. It might be about like 9 or 10. So I took 3 of those, and combined 2 into the first one. And then my second movement is one, and then the third one is a fourth one of his, that I took a wonderful solo sung by the alto singer, alto soloist, with the orchestra. It's really quite gorgeous. So here's an example, of it's a piece for orchestra and choir that I'm reducing now, to 3 people. So, and that's really what I loved about this project so much, was just that challenge that it presents as, here's beautiful music, but how do you translate this to that? There's quite a few steps of translation in between. And one of the reasons why it took so long to do this is I really took my time and made sure that I selected things that were going to work and work together and that formed a set of music. And you end up rejecting more ideas than you end up accepting for that. So it takes a little bit of time, to put it together.
So did you record any songs, tracks which you did not include on the album?
No, everything we recorded made it.
Okay.
And that's which is great. This was an ambitious project because it is 72 minutes long. It is essentially a double album. One CD fits 74 minutes of music. So it just made it under the wire, for one disc, to manufacture. But at 72 minutes, it's a lot of music, especially for piano trio, and with all of the these are fairly complicated arrangements, and some of this stuff took a long time to put together. The Duruflé in particular, I wrote a maniacal time signature for us to play over for the first one that my band was a little grumpy about when I first brought it in, but as usual, late came around. So, but it's a lot of music, a lot of focus and concentration in the studio to really make it be what it deserved to be.
The great thing, though, is one of the great things is that it's so dynamic. So even though you're talking about really just 3 instruments,
mm,
it is such a breath there
yeah.
that listeners will appreciate. All right, I'm now running a little late, a little low on time, so I'm going to jump. Well, let's talk about the Chopin piece, the prelude to AB minor number 69.
Oh yeah. Okay. So this was the very first one that I wrote for the project, actually. Funny story behind this one. So this was actually the first piece of classical music I ever heard, and I heard it. My exposure to this was, again, I came to this a little late in life. I was I had just gone to college, and I was playing a video game with my roommate, and every time you died, this beautiful music would play, and I, which it was kind of odd, but I was like, what is that? It got to the point where I wanted to die in the game just to hear this song. It was so pretty. And he's like, well, that's Chopin. And I said, who? And he said, here, listen to this. And that's how I learned from this video game. And so Chopin's Waltz in A flat major, Opus 69, the Goodbye Waltz, L'Adieu for the French speakers out there. Again, not one of his most famous waltzes, but just gorgeous. And so of course I turned it into an up-tempo jazz drum feature.
Oh, okay. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Let's go to the lament.
Oh, okay. So here's a hit song. Believe it or not, this was a hit song. Really, the only hit song in classical music, and so unlikely. So lament is taken from Górecki's Third Symphony. He This was a very serious piece of classical music that got released in the '90s, and it deals with very heavy subjects, like subjects of like the Nazi occupation of Poland, and then the Russians coming back and taking over, and it's a very heavy, serious subject, and the music is very serious and very heavy, very modern, and this was a hit song, believe it or not. This recording was commercially viable and actually like made the charts. It's the most unlikely of things, but in the '90s, it just became a sensation. I remember here in New York in Tower Records, the whole wall of CDs for Górecki's Third Symphony. I think it was like the only, it broke the record for like, classical music actually like charting and making money. So one of the most unlikely of things to be a popular music sensation. But here it is, a powerful piece of music for an orchestra that expands. It's just monumental work. Again, was always a favorite of mine. Starts with the double basses on the original recording, and I thought, oh, come on, got to do something with it. So that is Lament. Again, a heavy piece of music, but and maybe not something that everyone you might hear, a jazz ensemble do, but definitely one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you covered it because you're right. You won't hear it very often by a jazz
No.
ensemble, but it sounds so good here. The last song on the album is it Jesu
Yes, Jesus. So
by
here's,
Bach?
yeah, so this is one everyone would know. If you don't know classical music, you've heard this a million times at Christmas or at Easter or just in movies, TV. It's a melody that people know. It would be the one, yeah, very kind of like accessible, straight ahead. We played in a very straight ahead jazz style way. A little bit inspired by, say, like the Vince Guaraldi trio, famous for all the recordings he did for the Peanuts cartoons over the year. It has a little bit of that vibe. Um, yeah, this would be the quote unquote crowd pleaser. This was also one I wrote early on, and actually, I played it when my very first tour overseas to the UK in 2020, right before the pandemic. This was something I played, and people would always come up to me afterwards and say, "Have you recorded that?" And I said, "No, no, I don't have that one recorded yet." Well, now I do, and actually, I'll be back over in the UK this year. I'll be over there for about a week in March, at the end of March, from the 23rd through like the 27th, which will coincide with the release of this album on March 27th. And now I will be able to tell people when I play that tune, yes, I do have a recording. So,
Well, I forgot. I did forget. I purposely skipped over the Wagner song.
oh yeah, that would be Idol.
Tell me
Yes.
about that.
So again, it kind of shows like kind of the eclectic nature of this project. Like I really tried to pick modern music, Baroque music, and stuff in between. So Wagner, again, not something you usually tackle in jazz.
No.
He famous for his ridiculously long operas, and this is taken from one of those operas, the opera Siegfried. There is a break in the action in the opera where the orchestra just plays this beautiful unaccompanied, from singer, just orchestral piece. And it's the Siegfried Idol, and so I called it Idol. And so to take, again, it's a gorgeous piece of music with some wonderful harmony and some wonderful harmonic changes. And I've played it a few times, but I kind of turned it into from this like very Germanic, sound. We kind of put a lot of Americana on it, so it turns almost into this thing where we go from this very heavy Teutonic sound to suddenly like you're going to church. So. And that was actually the sound engineer when we recorded it. He's like, yeah, it's like you guys are going to church on this. And he knew all this music too, which was a real kick for me. Ryan, the engineer at Octavan, a Juilliard graduate in composition, so he knew all these things.
Wow.
And and it was a treat for us to have someone in the booth who actually kind of knew where this was coming from. It was a lot of fun.
I think I've seen probably two Wagner operas when I was in
Wow.
Chicago, and I swore after that I would never see
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
your interpretation is brilliant, Mark.
Okay.
It is much more inviting than the operas were. This is just good stuff. So you alluded to the fact that you were hitting the road for your album, or
Yeah, so
for new stages.
I leave town in from here in New York. I go to Switzerland on I think my first show. I leave on the 18th and land in Zurich and play on the 19th in Zurich, Switzerland, and then I have two more shows in Switzerland, kind of in the eastern region. And then I got a travel day and head to the UK, as I mentioned, for about a week for some concerts there. I'm excited to be returning to Pizza Express Dean Street there in London again. We was there a few years back. That's a fantastic club. I'm excited to go back there, as well as a number of other locations, which I'll be making all kinds of noise about on social media. So
Great. And these dates are on markwademusicny.com. So you can see where Mark's going to be. Also, look at his discography, which is on his website as well. Um, New stages, Mark. I don't know how you do it. It's a wonderful album, but given all you do outside of just making the music, it's just amazing. Is there anything I forgot or you want to mention that I didn't talk about?
no, I mean, I will. I just will say, give a shout out to Dot Time Records, who did pick up this album. So this album will be is out on Dot Time Records. All my previous albums were self-released, and been very fortunate that as self-released albums they did very well, and they got a lot of coverage. And I've been very grateful to all the journalists, including yourself, who have really been behind my music all the way. But it is nice to have a label for this one. Dot Time Records, great organization. They've been helping to
Mhm.
push this out. So you'll see things from me and from Dot Time, and really great to be on a really talented roster like they have. So that's been nice for me. So very fortunate for that.
Yeah, I'm glad they picked you up because you're another feather in their cap. They have some wonderful musicians. Mark, New Stages, which is out March 27th, is brilliant. Another brilliant album for you. Um, and you're going to be on tour. So enjoy your tour. And I really appreciate your time. I'm going to end the recording now. Thank you, Mark.
Take care. Thanks so much.